you feel misunderstood when you experience conflict in your relationship? Over the last decade, I've worked with over 200 couples, and I've noticed 4 big mistakes that most couples make when it comes to communication. So today I'm going to show you the exact same thing I've shown hundreds of couples that have helped them to communicate more effectively. Dr. John Gottman is known for being able to predict with over 90% accuracy whether couples will stay together or separate. One of the ways he does this is by assessing the presence or the absence of what he calls the 4 horsemen. In fact, one of the most important techniques that I learned in my training to become a certified Gottman couples therapist is how to eliminate the 4 horsemen from couple communication. So what are the 4 horsemen? Well, the 4 horsemen are 4 common communication traps that we may fall into. Basically, the 4 horsemen are ways of communicating that firstly get in the way of your partner being able to hear and understand your perspective, and secondly, get in the way of your needs being met in the relationship. Working to eliminate the 4 horsemen is one of the most important ways to start changing the way that you communicate with your partner. The 4 horsemen are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So what can we do about the 4 horsemen? Well, based on decades of research with thousands of couples therapists now know how to break these patterns of communication. Dr. John Gottman and his wife Julie Gottman, pioneers in couples counseling, have developed tried and tested antidotes for each of the 4 horsemen. An antidote is basically what we want to do instead of use the horsemen. So for example, when raising a complaint, we want to use a gentle startup to communicate so we can eliminate any criticism. The important thing to understand here is that often we see this kind of reactive communication when people are flooded with emotion. It's not that they don't care about their relationship or their partner, they do, but they may be feeling disconnected, unheard, or they may be feeling unappreciated, like the relationship is not meeting their needs. So emotion builds, often under the surface, so we may see things like quiet resentment start to creep in. The only way to address this is through effective communication where we can express our feelings and understand each other's needs. And the 4 horsemen get in the way of this. So importantly, we want to work to eliminate or reduce them so that we can increase connection in our relationship. The first horseman is criticism. In my clinical experience, criticism may creep into your relationship when you've been unable to share your feelings or you have unmet needs. Sometimes criticism may present because you have difficulty communicating on a more emotional level. Criticism is when you attack your partner's character. So for example, when you criticize, you might say something like, "You don't care about me," "You're never affectionate." Criticism is also when we say things like "you always" or "you never." For example, "You never listen to me." In my experience as a clinical psychologist, people who tend to criticize in their relationships are even harsher critics of themselves. So if you've just identified criticism as one of your horsemen, remember the goal is not to get caught in a cycle of self-blame, but rather to recognize this is not an effective way of communicating. The antidote to criticism, or what we want to do instead of criticizing, is to use a gentle startup to raise a complaint without blame. A complaint is when we focus on a specific behavior or situation, so to complain without blame. For example, when using a gentle startup, the complaint would be, "I feel lonely when we are not connecting physically. It would be great if once a day you could just come up and give me a random hug." The second horseman is defensiveness. Defensiveness is a way of blaming our partner. In the therapy room, I often see defensiveness follow criticism or perceived criticism. So sometimes you can perceive criticism even when someone is not criticizing you. This may be because you are sensitive to feedback. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where there was lots of criticism or a lack of praise or positive feedback. Some people experience an overwhelming sense of being in trouble in that moment, so feeling like they are somehow not good enough. There are 2 types of defensiveness. Firstly, counterattack, where you basically shift blame back onto your partner. And secondly, innocent victim stance. For example, you may say something like, "Nothing I do is right. What's the point in even trying?" The antidote to defensiveness is being able to take responsibility. When you're able to validate your partner's perspective and take responsibility, so you're recognizing the impact that your behavior may have had, your partner feels heard and understood. Once you've taken responsibility, your partner will be more able to hear your perspective, so you can also feel heard and understood. The third horseman is contempt. So contempt is when you express sort of superiority. It's sort of like saying that you're better than your partner in some way. You might look down on your partner. You are showing contempt when you do things like eye rolling, sarcasm, cynicism, name calling, and hostile humor. In my experience as a clinical psychologist, I've observed contempt tends to creep in when resentment has built in the relationship. This may be because you feel unseen, unheard, not desired, or unappreciated. Working on contempt is important in addressing these concerns and ensuring that your needs are met in the relationship. There are two antidotes to contempt. So the first one is what we call building a culture of appreciation. Sharing the things that you appreciate with your partner. So saying please and thank you and filling the emotional fuel tank. The second antidote, which is actually the same as criticism, is using a gentle startup. So changing the way that you communicate to express your feelings and, importantly, your deeper needs. The fourth horseman is stonewalling. So stonewalling is when the listener withdraws from the communication before the situation can be resolved. When you are stonewalling, you may not show much emotion. So you may not be giving your partner the body language, facial, or verbal cues that they need. Stonewalling usually happens when you are feeling flooded or emotionally overwhelmed, and your response is to disengage, shut down, or stop talking. Although we think about stonewalling in terms of a flood of emotion, in my experience in therapy, if you stonewall, you may experience this as a lack of emotion. So if you've learned this way of coping early in life, you may have gotten so good at switching off emotion that it feels like you automatically go into this freeze state. It's really important to remember that this is not because you don't care, rather that you struggle to sit in emotion. The antidote to stonewalling is using self-soothing strategies, usually taking a break in the couple context and then coming back to the discussion. If you're in a state of physiological arousal, you want to take a break for at least 20 minutes. Not think about the argument, use self-soothing strategies, and come back to the discussion. You can find more information on how to take an effective break with your partner in the caption. Now that you understand the four horsemen and each of the antidotes, you can start to shift the patterns of communication in your relationship. Changing patterns of communication can be difficult. We can get caught in the trap of highlighting all the things that our partner needs to change rather than focusing on what we can do to shift those patterns of communication. If you're finding it really difficult to shift out of those cycles of blame, you may want to see a couples therapist or find out more about my online relationship programs. It's important that you focus on spotting your own horsemen and start to change the way that you communicate in the relationship. When you can reduce the presence of the four horsemen, you will feel more heard and understood in the relationship. Not only impacting your communication, but also importantly, impacting the connection in the relationship. If you found this video helpful, hit the subscribe button now and check out my other videos to improve connection and communication in your relationship.